Erickson, chapter 17, The Doctrine of Humanity, presents one of those areas in which there is the most discernible conflict, and often encountered conflict, between science and religion, as both sides seem to argue at disparate points concerning just who and what we are as human beings. And yet the question is, in reality, is there such a difference? Need there be the incompatibility that oftentimes seems to exist? Well, let's just look through some of these items and see the biblical view and look at some of the scientific theories and see how we can approximate communicating or dialoguing with those of the scientific community. Erickson starts out by noting there are three images that we could portray humanity as being exemplary of. One would be machines. We could say that humanity is just the impersonal product of an impersonal universe. Another way to portray humanity is as animals, just to say that we are a natural outworking of animals on basically the same level as those animals below us in the world. Or you could say we're just pawns of the universe. We are just not all that meaningful. We have our part to play in the world just like the plant and the river, but we're all just sort of part of the universe without being in any qualitative way either above it or creatively different from it. Well, neither of those images would really be the best. So the Christian view is that creatures are made in the image of God. The Bible generally teaches that humanity is a special creation made in the image of God. Now, we'll cover this idea of what that image is in a chapter that's just coming up. But basically, the idea is there is something within us that sets us apart and that conveys the something of a divine personal creator who made us. As I said, we'll talk about that later. The biblical account teaches a personal creation, Genesis 1:26 and 27 and 2:7. In some way, God created humanity as a special act of creation. Now that's sort of the cutting point. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference if you want that creation to take place at the beginning of a literal 6-day week or 6,000 day week. I think Barnabas talked about the creation week as being each day being 1,000 years for the first 6,000 years of the earth, and then when we reach 7,000, that'll be the millennium. And regardless of how you schematize it, or if you see the creation of man taking place within a long period of development during which God creates various types or archetypes of life, and at a given point then creates humanity in that process. Regardless of which of those, what the Bible does teach and what is not negotiable from an Orthodox Christian perspective is that we actually are special creations of God. And that's where the defining point must remain, which also means that theistic evolution is not really an option because of Romans 5:12 through 20, where Christ is pictured as the second Adam. In other words, you can't really simply say, like many university students do today, well, evolution is true, that's just the way God created. Not quite so if one is going to have an orthodox theology of redemption, of atonement, and of Christology. These things all depend upon a special creative act of God, not only in sending His Son, who came into our world, the eternal Son of God who became as us, but also as an actual literal creation of our forebears of the human race. So you really can't just say evolution's the way God did it. Now, when scientists look at this, some would theorize that human development is consistent with both science and Scripture. And I have no problem at all with that. I would argue humanity is probably older than many suppose, hence our differences. For example, the difference in the races. I don't see the races being a result of, the old tale about Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and some people teach that the African races were especially due to some curse of God on Noah. Strange things. Actually, the different races, whether we're talking African, Asian, Eurasian, North American, whatever, I would argue that the races come from climactic adaptation. As the human family has lived in its various parts of the world, they have, over the period of time, developed characteristics most hospitable to the world in which they were raised. So the Nordic races are more white and convey the kind of skin pigmentation and structure that would relate to colder environments, whereas the African backgrounds or even the Asian, they come from different backgrounds and they have developed pigmentation and racial characteristics consistent with developing in much hotter climates. Now, I can't prove that, but it would seem to me that the different races have evolved over a long period of time. And remember, there's nothing wrong with saying there's evolution within a species. We do develop in certain ways, certain characteristics, but simply to say that we are the result of an impersonal process obviously would not be acceptable. But for example, note the following slides concerning prehistoric men. And these are classics. They're still in some of the books. Neanderthal man. In 1856, in a cave in West Germany, they found a skull, several parts of a skeleton. So they said, this is an ancient man, and this picture is what somebody's created. But remember, the way they determine humanity with these fragments is they put together the skull fragments that they find. And what they're looking for is the size of a brain case. And if you have a brain capacity of 1,330 centimeters, that would equal an average European male. So the point is, if you find a brain case, a skull that equals that, you're looking at a human being. It's not a pre-existent human being. Your teacher is no scientist, so don't let me sound too self-aggrandizing here and assume I know it all. I don't. But I understand that when you find old bones, a lot of difference is made in your conclusions by the theory with which you're putting them together. The question is just, what is the size of the brain case? Another example, Java man. In 1891, near the Java River, they found this remnants of a Java man, and Dr. Alexander Herdlicke of the Smithsonian Institution made the quotation at that point that all parts are human. But here, of course, you make this picture and you import into it your assumptions, sort of what a pre-human development might look like, but there's no evidence this person was really what we say. The Heidelberg man, 1907, they found a jawbone in a sandpit near Mauer, Germany. The jawbone was round, but it was normal. The teeth were distinctively human, and there are contemporary jawbones today that would match that of the Heidelberg man. So to create this picture and present this simply on the basis of a jawbone, it was an ordinary jawbone. It was not a caveman. They didn't exist. Now, one of the most notorious of these was the Piltdown man. In 1908, they found 4 skull fragments, a jaw fragment, a tooth, and a flint. The jaw was later found to be that of a chimpanzee. And Professor McCurdy of Yale said the skull fragments appeared to be human but were too incomplete to estimate the size of the brain case. Well, what happened is this was a fraud that was perpetrated most likely by one of the personnel of the London Museum of Natural History, and it was later found to be a fraud and featured in a Nova television special entitled The Greatest Hoax, because England wanted to be the place where you had the earliest man, and of course Germany had already gone on record as saying it had found a couple of men, so England was not going to be left out, but ultimately it was found out to be an actual hoax. Then the Cro-Magnon man, these remains appear to be the same as modern humans, and since 1956 a number of remains have been found, and scientists have showed these to be distinctly human. So I would argue that what we call the cavemen never really existed, and that what we have is the discovery of ancient remains of various creatures, some human and some not. Definitely not what is ordinarily pictured in the textbooks of some years ago. And I do not know if in current textbooks still have these men portrayed. I would think not, but we all have our own little myths, our own little meta-narratives, whether we're scientists or theologians or whatever. It's awfully hard for the scientific world, I think, to give up on those. Well, what is the theological meaning of creation? Well, first is humanity is unique. It's different from all of the other creations, and it thus has a high role in creation, but also a great responsibility. And so that's very important. We have to be responsible, and we have to understand that God has a place for us in this world, and we have to be diligent in fulfilling it, which currently we don't seem to be completing very well given the problems we are having in the environment and in social welfare and the general conduct of our human race.